Okay, thanks for joining us for our monthly environmental career coaching webinar. And this month we're talking about getting published. And we're joined by Frank Dirrigl. And I'm going to get started by going through the agenda and some housekeeping items. If you'd like to at any time, you can enter into the chat general comments. If you have questions, try to put them in the Q&A section, which is right next to the chat. That way they get kind of saved until we've answered them and they won't get lost up in the chat. And I'll be giving you a handout up in that area too a little bit later. So our agenda for tonight, it will be starting with introductions of myself and Frank, and then we'll go over what the purpose of this webinar is, and then overview of the ways to get published. And the list keeps growing. I keep finding new ones for myself, and then we'll dive into Frank and getting his expertise on how to get published in the more formal sense. Then we'll have time for a Q&A, and then we'll wrap it up. So again, thanks for joining. So my name is Laura. I'm the past president of the Tampa Bay Association of Environmental Professionals, and since moving from Tampa to Syracuse, I have now been involved with the National Association of Environmental Professionals, which is actually where I met Frank, and I'm on their conference planning committee and their education committee. I founded the Environmental Career Coach after being the president of the Tampa Bay Association of Environmental Professionals. I worked with a lot of students and did some mentoring, and noticed that for myself and most of the students that I worked with, that the same patterns were being played out, which led to the same sort of disappointments in seeking environmental careers. We have a lot in common, so we end up with a lot of the common outcomes. And I've been one of the leaders of the Women in STEM and Environmental Careers in Tampa since 2015. We have our third annual workshop coming up on the 23rd, and it is sold out for the third year in a row, which is awesome. And going back before that, I have 13 years of experience in environmental science and working in local government. I'm now a certified project manager, coach, and business owner. So I'm going to turn it over to Frank to do his own introduction here.
So I'm Frank Dirrigl, and I'm a associate professor of environmental science at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley. Started my career a long time ago, wanted to be a high school teacher, and ended up getting another degree on top of my bachelor's. So I got two different bachelor's degrees. So I got one in biology and I got one in anthropology. Next thing I know, I was in grad school. The next thing I know, I was teaching college, and now I've never left. And so I've also had the opportunity, because the way that I paid for myself to get through school a lot of times was doing environmental work. So I've actually done a lot of environmental consulting my entire life, and now I teach other students how to do it. And I work with people like Laura and everyone else from the National Association of Environmental Professionals, basically to find out, what should I be teaching my students? What type of skills do students really need to have to get these jobs? And one of the most important ones is communication skills, learning how to write, learning how to present different things, feeling comfortable talking within a group of people. And so I'm here to try to give you some different advice as you are at different stages in your career, particularly in the area of publishing, so that you're not afraid to try. Because I took a chance when I was a senior in college, and next thing I know, I got my first publication. Wasn't the most exciting, but I actually did it all on my own, which I never thought that I actually could. And I'll show you that you can do the same thing.
Thanks, Frank. And a couple good points in there. One, definitely that a lot of our lives are kind of choose your own adventure, right? You can either let life happen to you, or you can keep changing the chapters and figuring out where you want it to go. And I think some people are kind of born that way, and some people need a little help with that. But yeah, we got to make our opportunities. And a lot of this getting published advice is about that. So back to that, the purpose of this webinar then is for us to just give you some ideas. I want to start with some of the smaller things that you can do that you might not even consider publishing, but they're the things that can get you started off in a direction and get some writing skills before you jump into writing a full-blown peer-reviewed journal document or even a book. And just kind of turn on the light bulbs for you. If you may think a lot of times an idea isn't formed until someone just sheds light on it, and then you put the dots together. So that's what we want to do here. And as we're mentioning, like, as a career coach, I'm always just trying to get people to find ways to stand out, to have something to talk about. And this is a great way to do that. So who's this for? You know, career coaching, a lot of people think I just work with students, but I'm working with students, but I'm also working with people who want to change careers. In this subject is great for anybody who's at any stage in their career, and you can kind of pick and choose from any of these types of publishing that we're about to go through. So why should you publish? What's in it for you? One of the questions I had got was, should I watch this webinar? I don't really write anything. I don't have any intentions of writing anything. And you know, my response is that maybe you don't want this today, but maybe a month from now, a year from now, you do something really cool, and then you want to write about it, and you'll have this knowledge and information at hand. So there's that. And then also the 3 keys that I focus on as a coach are the knowledge, experience, and interest. This is developing your passion, navigating the industry, knowing what's out there, what your options are for jobs, and setting yourself apart. So this really focuses on your passion and the setting yourself apart piece, but you never know where it will lead you. You may start in on a specific topic and then learn more about that in different industries. So at this point, I'm gonna share the handout. So I've just done that. So you should be able to grab this handout. Is a very simple series of questions just to ask yourself from idea to finish through. And some of it is are things that I'm going to talk about, and some of it are things that Frank is going to talk about at the end or after I'm done talking. And I do have a couple of polls. There's only a few of you here, but I'm going to roll them out anyway. So our first one is, which best describes you? I always like to know what stage people are at on the webinar. So I'll just give you a minute to answer that. So if you're watching this in a replay, I'm just asking which best describes you if you are about to graduate, have already graduated, or a working professional. And if you are watching a replay and you have an option to comment, you are welcome to tell us that as well. So we have one who's far from graduating and one who is graduating pretty soon. Thank you for that. And then what to publish. So that's going to be the first step there on your handout. What do I talk about? And this is an area that people get hung up on. So yeah, cool, I can do all these things, but what do I say? So this really digs into your knowledge, experience, and interest. What are the things currently that are interesting to you? And if you look at your handout, it talks about researching, of course. And but you can write about things like how-tos. If you are learning things in college and you want to talk about a different technique or method, there's lots of environmental procedures. And all of these things then are things that you can learn more about as you share them with others to learn. So you can do how-tos, adventure stories. So an example, a friend of mine actually is a career changer, and he started his own business, but as part of that, he started a mini, like once a month, he takes people outdoors. So he's not really an eco tour guy, but it's a program that he offers, and it's to get people excited about being outdoors, and that just lets them make the connection between their office day life where they don't get outside much and the outdoors. And he's had people who are afraid to take their shoes off and stand in the river, but he brings them out there, and he's life changing just through these little adventures. And then that's something for him to talk about, and a talking point for me right now. And you can share your passions, get a deeper knowledge of your passions. You can do interviews. So this is something that I plan on rolling out next year or in a couple of months, is a system to do interviews. So instead of you asking an employer for an informational interview, you would actually interview someone for the purpose of creating a YouTube video that is shared with the world to talk about what is it that this person does, what do they love about it, and things like that. So that's something that you can do. You can do a specific topic focus, again, going back to your passions. Photographs, a lot of people have a photographic journal and they write articles about them. And then mapping, I think mapping is underutilized. Everyone's learning GIS in their environmental science programs these days, and Esri has an annual story maps contest, and you can do story maps for free. And I just realized I'm going to turn off my camera. I told this to Frank earlier. I keep staring at myself. So give me 1 second while I turn my camera off. And make sure. Okay, can you hear me? So anyway, sorry, I was looking at myself and not my notes. So the photographs are something that you can do, and then mapping. Esri has an annual story maps contest where you can create your own story map and then enter it into a contest. So that's another thing that you can do. And just editorial articles. So those are just a couple of ideas. There's lots more. And then where to publish. So you can publish on social media, right? There's that's the simple, easy, fastest way. And you can do this through LinkedIn articles, not just posting, Instagram, Facebook. So you could start a theme-based Instagram, not just, you could start with your own personal, but you could create a different one that's based on a specific habitat or environmental issue. If you look back at the handout, it'll give you some ideas for that, how to align those things. Same with Facebook pages. You can create a page that's basically based around a theme. And you could set up a group too if you have a group of people that want to have a conversation around a topic. And then blogs, I think you all are familiar with blogs. Vlogs are video blogs. So if you don't want to write, if writing is not your strength, but you're more comfortable with public speaking, you could do more of a blog thing. Same with podcast. And that's another way that you could tie in interviews. There's another example I wanted to share is from a woman that I know from Tampa. Her name is Mel, and she has a podcast called Mel the Engineer, and it's on STEM-XM. And she does this thing where she interviews females in leadership roles that are engineers. So she has a very specific topic, but it was something that she was passionate about. So it gave her the opportunity not only to meet other people with like minds and to learn from them, but also to share their stories along with her own, and then also just have something to talk about. And then conferences, I just got today an advertisement for Restore America's Estuaries, and they're looking for posters. So some conferences you have to present a poster, you have to be there to present it, but others do not. So that's something that you can do as well if you have. Now again, going back to like, what should I write about, or how can I make a poster if I haven't done anything? What Frank just mentioned when he's talking about his bio is sometimes you have to just make it up. So meet somebody at a networking event, find someone who has a project that you'd like to jump in on, do something as part of your internship, as part of your college. So you got to get creative. You can either, like we said, ride the wave and see where life takes you, or you can direct it. So you got to do some research, and it's so easy to find stuff now with the internet. So I'm going to check my notes really quick, see if I mentioned everything. There's another blog that I wanted to mention for an example. It's called The Marine Diaries. This was 3 girls who are fairly young who just decided that they want to write about the ocean. And there's opportunity there on their blog, and this happens a lot. If you visit other blogs, they have opportunity for guest writers. So that's a great opportunity, because you'll not only have the opportunity to write for them, but they'll give you feedback and let you know if what you've written obviously is worthy for their site. But you won't have to do anything. You don't have to set up your own website, but you can get your feet wet doing it and have that on your resume and things to talk about while you're networking as well. So at this point, I'm going to let Frank take over for talking about the more traditional way of, or what most people think of when we're getting published, is the academic research journals like Environmental Practice. So give me 1 second while I change over to the slides. All right, so Frank, take it away.
Okay, so one of the things that Laura talked about, actually 2 things. You might even basically inadvertently get published because you're working on let's say you're an environmental scientist, you're working on a project, and your data or your summaries or stuff makes it into a report, and that report is actually available to people online. And that's something that a lot of people don't think about too. So any type of, there's all these different ways of getting published, and that might be an inadvertent way. The other thing that she talked about too was the how-tos. That was my first publication. My first publication was a how-to, and basically I worked at a museum, and I basically kept track of everything my boss was telling me, and I turned that into an article one summer when I was a student. So what I want to do here is I want to show you that it's not as scary as you think it is. I'm going to be talking sometimes in the context of environmental practice because that's what the National Association of Environmental Professionals wants me to do. But there are many different avenues to get published at many different levels. This is just one of them, that where you're having an audience of environmental specialists around the country and around the world that are actually looking for different type of articles to learn something that can help them with their projects. Let's see. Okay, so like I said, the most important thing is don't be afraid. And a lot of times you might there's different ways of doing it. You could do it on your own. Like I started one summer when I was a student. I was working at a museum, and I was a museum preparator. One of my specialties was preparing skeletons, and I kept track of all the different things that my mentor was telling me what to do. And then I started reading about different things, and I decided to write a review article on how to do it. And next thing I know, I submitted it. It wasn't like a really big publication. But in a year or two, just to kind of give you an idea, you never know where your work will wind up. In a couple of years, I found out here I am, I'm just a senior in college, and my article was actually being required reading on college syllabi, focusing on museum studies. So I thought that was kind of cool when I was back then. Another common way is work with a faculty member, work with a mentor in college, work with a colleague. All the different type of people that you meet, oftentimes it's very, very easier to and to feel a little more confident by working with someone else. I do that very much even in my career now. If I'm not very super familiar with an area of research, I'll work with someone else too, so we can learn from each other. Another way is even working with a society, different type of groups that are out there, or even a journal's board member. If you know people that are actually in the process of publishing or doing reviews or providing peer reviews where people are reading other people's work and commenting on them, as you work with people, you'll get more familiarized with the whole process, and it will be a little bit less scarier than a lot of people think of it. I think the most important thing to always remember in the end is two things. One is it actually can be kind of fun. I just recently moved my house, which was a nightmare in 102-degree weather here down in South Texas. And as I was doing it, I found a bunch of old reprints that no one has anymore because everyone just has PDFs. And I actually picked up one of my old articles from maybe 10, 15 years ago, and I read it. And I was like, wow, I don't even remember reading it. This is actually pretty good. And so it is kind of fun to see your name in print and to read some of the things that you actually produced. And it's even more flattering when people ask you for copies of your of the PDFs, or ask you to comment on stuff, or ask you for advice. The other thing is there's lots of different ways. Align it with the skills, align it with what you know best, whether it's something scientific or something not scientific. I've actually started getting into writing about education, which is a whole different area that's been very difficult for me to write about. There's also different type of things that people will do with more technical scientific writing. This is a very important skill to have, particularly the technical writing. There's a little bit difference between what people might consider to be technical writing and scientific writing. I'm not going to get into that, but oftentimes the type of writing that you would do on the job is technical writing. And that's a very important skill to have. Regardless of what level you're at. In fact, lots of times it's that ability to communicate in writing that will allow you to jump up between different type of positions, from an entry level position to a more advanced position. It's also important for professional development. In some situations, it's something that's expected. There are different parts of your career where you're at that stage and you should be helping other people. And one way to do that is through written sources, written things that you would actually publish. I think it's really neat to be able to exchange new information, ideas, things that you find out, things that you make better, like exactly what you said in terms of those how-tos, developing new approaches and methods. I'm like a big method geek. I always find that, wow, I wish someone told me how to do this. It would make make my life a lot easier. And next thing I found out, I get frustrated about it, and I'm writing an article about it. And hopefully it will help other people that don't have to start things from scratch. And for me, the reason why I actually picked years ago when I was looking for a journal to publish some of my work in, I picked environmental practice. And one of the reasons why I picked this, because I thought, geez, it might be kind of neat that at the end of my article, if I'm able to give some different type of suggestions or guidance to other people, maybe I can make some of the permits that they work on better. And maybe they'll start adopting some of my suggestions. And so that's kind of a neat way to kind of think about it too. So there's all sorts of different personal and professional benefits of actually publishing your work. Just like Laura was also talking about, think of it in terms of what you do and how you can transform that into some sort of form of publication, whether it's written, whether it's something that you're presenting, whether it's something that you're writing in a newsletter, whether it's something that you're doing certain things, social media, all these different type of avenues. It can be simple as something as an observation, or a finding, or like I already talked about, a technique. One of my favorite things I tell my students is I was taking as a professor when I first moved to Texas, I was taking a class on wetland plants. And I had no idea anything. I'm from Connecticut, so I had no idea about anything in Texas. And I took a class on wetland plants. And I was up in the Austin area. I'm way down by the border now. And I'm walking through the woods with a professor. And in the typical fashion that I am, I'm not paying attention like I should as a student. And I'm looking at the ground and I start noticing things. And next thing I know, I'm taking some snails and I'm stuffing them in one pocket and I'm putting some soil and I'm putting some leaves in another pocket. I brought that back, started looking at them, and actually published an article based on what was in my pockets, which is something that most people would never even have
That's great.
thought about. And the funny thing is, and it gets cited sometimes. And I would never have thought by just, of course, the most embarrassing thing was, it wasn't really embarrassing, but it kind of was, is that I had to go back to the professor that I wasn't paying attention to at that time, tell him what I was doing, and ask him for help and ask him to be a co-author so he could describe the habitat that I found all these things in, because I wasn't writing down the plants he was telling me. And so all I was doing was walking through the woods and I noticed something.
Well, here's where my brain goes with that is like you can make an entire series of it. You can just go on hikes, schedule fun time for yourself, and just put random stuff in your pockets and write about it.
Yeah, and it's some things you would just never think about. Presentations, whether it's a formal presentation, whether it's a something where you gave a talk, or something where you gave a poster presentation, any of these type of things could actually lead themselves to be written out more formally, that can have a different type of publication on whatever different type of level that you feel most comfortable on. A white paper. These tend to be very big review papers. Oftentimes it might be something that you might be involved in if you're working for an environmental firm. These are very common type of things. They're usually pretty long. But what they could do is they could actually be transformed into a smaller paper or a series of different papers, which I think is a useful thing also. And then, of course, technical reports. I had one of my first semesters here, I had the opportunity to work on a drainage system that was being expanded, and they wanted to know something about the water quality, the freshwater macroinvertebrates, and the fish. And so I put together a team of people. We went and outdid it, and I was paying attention to what I thought was kind of neat and different type of recommendations. And I actually, that was one of my first publication in environmental practice, was based on me actually just doing a survey that I was getting paid for and never thought about really publishing, but I took that information and actually forced myself to write it into something, and it came out in environmental practice, which that was my first introduction to the entire group. There's lots of different types of publications, from just a note, a very short. Some publications can be a single observation or a single finding that you can put on a page or a page and a half. Is a very common thing. I gave examples. I don't want to give examples myself, but they were the easiest ones to find as I was just moving my house. And so that was the one I did. Land snails in an ephemeral pools at Otine Swamp in Gonzales County, Texas. In other words, how to stuff soil, leaves, and snails in your pocket and turn it into a publication. It looks a lot fancier than what was in my pockets. I also was working on something for my dissertation, and I had to come up with different type of methods. And so I actually worked on just publishing a method paper. That was the other type of thing that I did. It can be simple. One thing people don't think about too is not just that, but what if you use a new type of software that people aren't necessarily familiar with that just came out? You could do, lots of people are used to book reviews or film reviews. You could write a software review. And so that's actually something I've actually never did, but my graduate student right now is using some software that not too many people have used before to look at different type of ecological services on different plots of land. And she didn't know about it, but I told her, you're going to write a software review and it's going into environmental practice. So I surprised her with that one because even I've never done that before. But what did she do? She knows she has to do it, so she actually started looking for examples. How do people put together a software review, and to kind of get an idea of making up a template, to kind of get yourself started. A case study is a good example too. There might be a certain project that you worked on, or a certain type of thing that you studied, and that's an actual opportunity to write about. You can write a review article. So here's something that you may not necessarily be involved in actual doing the research, but you're interested in that topic. And sometimes it might be just for your own purpose. But as you're going through and summarizing all this information, you might say, geez, you know what? Other people might be interested in learning about what I'm learning about too. And so you put it in a review article. I find these very helpful. Some people, I remember my advisor always hated them, but there's actually entire journals that do nothing but present review articles and about different topics. And it might be someone who does the research, but a lot of times it's just someone who's interested in the topic. And of course, if you want to be fancier, if you've worked on any type of independent research, if you did an independent study in college or something on your own, or you did something like, let's say you worked with a mentor, or you work more formally in a research team or something like that, that's where you would do more of like a actual research article. And surprisingly, that's the one I did right there. You can see another one that I did that I put into environmental practice with two of my students. And what we were interested in doing was just looking at measuring water quality in stormwater canals down here in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. So there's lots of different types of publication, and there's different type of venues. You could be very formal and do it in a journal, or you could do the same type of things and put them in other type of venues, even the social media things that Laura has talked about. There's all sorts of great resources that people wouldn't think about. I mean, now it's even easier because you can just look all over the internet. And so I put together just some of these for you. There's if you feel intimidated by submitting things to a more formal journal, or you might think, oh, geez, what are researchers going to think of just me? I don't really know a lot. Well, maybe you might feel more comfortable trying your first publication in an undergraduate journal. And there's a whole list of these that you can see in the Council of Undergraduate Research. We'll provide a list of them. Sometimes they might be related to different type of university departments, or other types they might be just something in more general that specializes in giving opportunities for undergraduates to write. Another thing that you can do is there's a different type of ones associated with universities or different student societies, different type of honor societies or other type of things. You can actually do that too. A lot of these will be associated with either a certain type of scholarly work, or it could even be different type of newsletters that people put out. I know down here it's kind of neat. Texas A&M, they have a wildlife not a magazine, but like a little publication that comes out. It's like a newsletter that comes out every quarterly. And what it does is it highlights. It's a different highlights of students' work, and the students write something about what they're doing, and then the people that put it together write something about them too. So there's all sorts of different opportunities, whether it's undergraduate research, whether it's related to an actual place that you've already gone to school, whether it's a certain type of student society, whether it's different type of honor societies. And what I try to do is not to cover all of them, but just to kind of let you know that these things actually do exist. And with a little more research on the internet, I'm sure you can find a lot more. Finally, there's all these different type of stages, and it can be a pretty lengthy process, but it goes in a series of steps. You can actually, if you're doing something formally, like let's say in a journal, you could expect the process to take anywhere between 6 months to even up to a year, sometimes even more than a year, for an article to come out. And there's all these different type of steps. And I like this that I was able to find, because I'm going to actually use this in some of my stuff with my students, because there's a couple of things I think I really want to mention here. The first thing is, when you have a topic, you're going to be reading other type of articles too. And as you read other articles, you'll be like, wow, I like the way that person really writes, or I wish I could write that way. And even I do that, even after all these years that I've been a professor. So reading different type of issues and trying to come up with a template, so you can visualize how you want to effectively convey the information that you want to your audience. Lots of times we don't have a lot of time to sit. I wish I had lots of time to sit down and write for a week. But I just don't. I always have something going on. I teach all year round. So what I find myself doing is writing in chunks. I might sit down. I might have an hour or two or a couple hours. And say, you know what? I'm just going to try to write a really good paragraph about this. And the next thing you know, you write one paragraph, you write another paragraph, and before you know it, you have an entire article that you've worked on. And it doesn't seem as grueling or as scary of a task if you're writing in small parts, rather than trying to sit down. I'm going to write a paper from beginning to end, which I think no one should do. At the same time, a great thing to do before you even send it anywhere is have someone that you know read it over and see what they think. I'm lucky here. I can go up and down the hallway and have other professors read my stuff, or I might just send it to a friend, someone that I know. And now I know lots of people with the National Association of Environmental Professionals. So that's actually a great way to do it too. At the same time, if people ask you to read their work, and you yourself become a better editor, and that way your writing becomes better too. So it's a kind of like a two-way thing. And so there's all these different type of things, even before you decide to actually try to find a venue for your work, in terms of going through these different type of stages and making something that you're writing that other people would be interested in reading. One of the things, I'm not going to read this always, but one of the good things to do is to make sure that what you're interested in conveying, that you're doing it to the right audience. And a good way to do that is by reading, whether it's a feature magazine or any type of a specialized blog or an actual journal like Environmental Practice, is to read over the journal's aims and scopes. Sometimes, very common for us, we actually did this last month, we end up rejecting articles just because they don't fit. It's not something that the readers of Environmental Practice would be probably interested in. It probably is more fitting in another journal. And that's what we'll say. We'll say, look, we need to put this into, you probably should think of somewhere else to put it. And so it's not because your work is bad, it's because it's just something that doesn't fit. And so one of the things to do is to read the journal's aims and scope. Another that's really useful is sometimes your article might just get rejected because you didn't follow the directions. Most of the time, it may not, because they'll work with you, but it's always important that if you want to get to the point, you need to read very closely the instructions for authors, page limits, how they want things formatted, how different type of things should be presented. All these different type of things actually should be found in most of the things that you might be interested in pursuing. So that's always an important thing too. Most of the time, instruction authors are very tedious to read. But sometimes you'll actually be surprised. When I published that article about those snails that were in my pocket, the instructions author from the Southwestern Naturalist actually had all sorts of really cool stuff about grammar that I didn't even know, and things to avoid. And I was like, wow, I've been doing that for years. I guess I shouldn't have. And I learned a bunch of stuff about writing just by reading over the instructions of authors. So you never know what you're going to learn that can make your writing better. Finally, some people might say, well, what does it mean if my article gets peer reviewed? So basically, works that become considered part of science are peer reviewed by a community of scientists. And it's something that we do to each other. We provide it as a service. You don't get paid to be a peer reviewer, but it's the kind of like, we send it to someone to kind of decide, is the work worthy of being published, and at what level? And what are some of the things that can be done to help this article to make it even better? And there's a couple things to always think about. Sometimes it's sometimes you say, geez, wow, they were pretty cruel to me. But most of the time in the end, your article becomes a lot better. Um, but one of the things that you can think about is that oftentimes what they do is a double blind review. And so here's a good way of not feeling intimidated at all, because no one's ever going to know your name on what is submitted except for the editor, and the editor is not reviewing your work, and you will never know who's reviewing your work. So it goes both ways. That's why it's double blind. No one knows anything. All they have is the title of this article that's in front of them. So if you get rejected from a double blind review, no one even knew you. No one's ever going to know that you even submitted that article. And then you can decide the different type of levels of acceptance, whether you want to further on and revise your manuscript, or whether say, you know what, maybe I'm better off publishing it somewhere else, or maybe it shouldn't be published at all. And I've had that I've had that happen to me too. So there's all sorts of different type of decisions, and it's something that I've been involved in recently as becoming my first year as an editor for environmental practice. And there's a couple different times. The one I haven't read, except with minor revisions, that's the most common. I think it's very rare for someone to submit an article and have it so perfect that there's nothing nothing that could be done to make that article better. I actually know one person in this department that actually had an article accepted and didn't get any comments on it. And I was like, wow. And even that had never happened to him. And he was very surprised about it. So even your best people who have been writing for years and years are always going to have things accepted with minor revisions. I remember when I was first started writing, I went to Dr. Schaefer, who was an editor of probably one of the most well-known entomological journals, the insect journal in the world. And he'd been an editor of this journal for 25 years. And I was laughing with him because I said, geez, I used to talk with him, how can I help students learn how to write? And I said to him, I bet when you get a paper back that there's hardly any type of red marks all over it. Back in the old days when people would write on the manuscript, now everything's done electronically. And he said to me, no, there's always a better way to state more effectively what you were trying to say. And that's what the whole purpose of peer review and people doing your reading your article. So one of the things good to do is think of it as a way of the peer review process can make what you wrote even better. And that's really what it's trying to do before it gets into something. So sometimes what you write might need a lot of work. And they'll say, you know what, this needs a major revision before we're even going to consider it again. So what they're doing is they're trying to encourage you to keep working on it and resubmit it at a later date. And in other times, they might just totally just reject it and say, you know what, it needs a lot of work. And you probably should either consider going somewhere else or doing more work and revising it even more on your own before you want any of us to look at it. And or just a flat out reject. And again, there's different reasons why a manuscript would be rejected. One of them oftentimes is because it just doesn't fit within the journal. And again, what I always think about is when you get these different type of reviewers, it could be a blow to your ego. Some reviewers are really nice. Other ones like to be nasty. I don't know why. Maybe it's an ego trip. But once you settle down and you go, geez, these people really suck, but I'm going to, and you calm down after your first day of reading their stuff and you look at it again in a couple of days, a little more objectively, you will notice that most of the things that they say probably will help your paper. And your job is to go through and to address them. And you either do what they tell you to do, or you decide, no, I am not going to do what they told me to do. And then you explain to an editor like me why you didn't think it was important. And it's kind of like this back and forth thing that goes on. But basically, think of it, like I said, I always think of it as the way of it's going to make my paper even better. And every one that I've ever done that I've gotten a review back, even the ones that were really, really cruel to me, has actually made the paper better when I finally saw it in print and I read it. But again, what you want to basically do is to, if you're going to respond to reviewers, just be specific and be honest. And sometimes you will clash with them. I've actually had my first clash basically ever really, really clashing with some, because I was just like, this person is an idiot. They don't know what they're, I was like, they don't know what they're talking about. And I got to the point of aggravation because they actually sent it to the reviewer, sent it back to me. I corrected it. It got sent back to the reviewers, which is kind of strange. And then they made comments and sent it back to me for another revision. And this guy insisted that I needed to measure the length and width of the shell of this animal. And in my first revision, I explained that this animal, although it's a mollusk, does not have a shell. It's like a sea slug, but it's different. And I was like, and I gave all the information. What did I get? He gave a nasty comment back to me that said, the author has decided to ignore my suggestions of doing this, blah, blah, blah. It should have listened to me and all that. And so finally, in my response, I decided not to even give him a response. I sent a picture of the sluggy thing swimming in the water that didn't have a shell. And I put that in my response, and I never heard anything back. So like I said, it's a back and forth, and you have to try to not take it personally is the most important part. Finally, there's different benefits. Why did I pick environmental practice? Mostly because I thought it would be a good venue for people that the people that would read my work would be people I wanted to read my work. Another real benefit was there's no page charges. Some places will charge you to submit an article. Some journals or feature places will actually charge you by the page. And the nice thing is that like some journals like Environmental Practice don't charge anything. Or sometimes if you're a member of a certain type of society, if you're a member, you are allowed to publish for free. But if you're a non-member, you have to pay per page. And then so what do? You become a member. That's what I've done. Or you have to become a member in order to even submit something. Environmental Practice, you don't have to be a member of the National Association of Environmental Society. You can be at any type of level, and we're not going to charge you. The only thing that ever gets charged for is with colored figures. So what do? I never put color figures in anything that I do because I don't have that money. Different type of publishers actually offer. Well, that's a tongue twister. Different type of services too. And so Environmental Practice works with Taylor and Francis, and they have a whole system that, if you want extra help, even before you submit it or during that process of revisions, you can ask them. Most of the time it might involve a fee, but again, it's something where someone would actually look over and help you with your article. Another type of benefit that people are doing now, I actually just saw that was something I just published about writing, was that many journals are doing online publications before they even come out in issue. Some journals have decided to be totally online just because it's just cheaper. It can save. It's cheaper to publish it that way, and most people aren't keeping things in print anyways. They just want PDFs, and it's for everybody all around. You can keep the membership costs in the society lower by doing that. And so lots of times these type of publications will come out, and people will see them even before it's actually sent to everyone in the mail. And so that's kind of a neat thing too that you can look for in different journals. Finally, like I said, don't ever be afraid. If it's something that's would be applicable to environmental practice, you have people like me who are here to help. As an editor, I take on the role. I mean, my own self is I want to help people get through the process and help them any way that I can, so that it's not a scary or grueling process or frustrating type of process. And I think most different type of editors will work with that. One of the things that we're trying to do, that if you are a student, is that we are looking for student authors. I would love to be able to highlight every couple of issues a student author, based on some of the work that they're doing to help them launch their career. The same type of thing that Lauren is trying to do with all the different type of webinars that she's providing for you in the different type of career coaching. So with that, I think I've probably said enough.
All right, thanks, Frank. That was a lot of really good information and some things I didn't know either. I actually am published a couple of times, but they're more of those, like you talked about, accidental publishings. I just was part of a project as project manager. So when I Google my name, a couple of publications do come up, which is cool. I like it. There's a lot worse things that could come up.
And you probably didn't even know they were on the internet. That's kind of a funny thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, knowing that if you did want to publish, that there are those help portals there, that's really good to know. Mm-hmm. And I just want to point out, like you just said, this is me publishing. So, I want to put myself out there. I want people to know who I am. I want to provide good information to people, but I'm not perfect at this. I had a poll. I'm going to do a poll right now. I totally forgot to do this poll. So there's a poll out now for you guys that I wanted to do in the beginning, but if you could do it right now, I want to know, what are you thinking of when thinking of writing? What is a big challenge for you? And I see at least one of you has said not knowing where to start. I hope that's been corrected. If not, let us know what questions, put in the chat or the Q&A what questions you do have. But you got to get your feet wet somewhere. Everybody does. There's no author out there who went straight to full-blown bestseller list. That everyone's been rejected. Everyone has been probably laughed at or sniggled at or whatever, and or had snarky comments about their content, because somebody always thinks they know better than you. But, and I have the same thing. My option is to do these webinars or not do these webinars. And I get the mind chatter that says, what if I say something that isn't true? Or what if I don't say everything I wanted to say? And it's, there's an element of writing here. I've done the PowerPoint, and it's verbal, but you've got to put yourself out there and then just start building that. And then, you don't know where it's going to go from there. And then I liked what you said too, Frank, about publishing your work. I worked in environmental government for 10 years and did a lot of projects. I mean, I was a project manager, and when you don't publish it, it all kind of just washes away. Mm-hmm. And so the opportunity to publish these things also holds them in perpetuity, and somebody remembers we actually did this thing, so that's a great thing to have. And so I guess just to wrap it up, if you guys have questions, put them in the chat or QA, and then I have some additional questions for Frank if you guys don't have any. But I just wanted to say too that writing and publishing isn't just about the content. So how does this tie back then to getting yourself ahead in your career and in your resume and life? Is, it's not just about the fact that you wrote something and your name is on it. It shows that you were a part of a project, or depending on the content, if this is your own personal blog, it shows that you have initiative and you have follow through, and that you're able to get things started from idea to execution. So that's huge, especially if I'm hiring somebody. I want to know that you know how to do that. If I come to you with an idea as a business owner, and I want to know somebody who can help me do this new thing I want to do, I'm going to look for the doers. And that's one of the, when you've been doing something like this, that kind of shows that sort of initiative. So I don't see any questions here, Frank. So we've got 12 more minutes. I'm going to ask you the questions that we started with. So I just kind of talked about this a teeny little bit, but question back to you. How do I represent my publication experience on a resume?
Oh, well, usually, like I said, you might have a area. Like in mine, I just wrote down the title publications, and then I just give the citation. And there's all sorts of different ways to cite things, whether it's something in social media, whether it's a film, all these different types, even a map. There's all these different type of ways to do it. And so in mine, I just put down, let's say you didn't have a lot. Maybe you want to combine them. You might have a section in your resume that might say presentation/publications, and you could put a couple of them in there if you don't want to have it separated because you don't think you have enough. So that's basically what I do, is I just put it right in there, just like you would put in something in your resume if you did volunteering, and you would use the title volunteering. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay. How do you feel about like a link to an online portfolio?
Yeah, it depends on, I guess it depends on how your work is being sent. I'm not really sure, but I guess if you were sending a PDF and you had a link, to your work, I mean, I'm sure people would click on it. And that might be a way to get them interested in you too when you're trying to get a job.
Right. I think that could work well for technical positions too. Like if you're looking for a GIS job or something creative, marketing position. Okay, another question. I write for my university paper, but it's not environmental. Can I include that experience on a resume?
Oh, absolutely. I always tell people, anything that's related to what your career goal is, yes. For my students, I help them with their resumes. I tell them I want what I would call a professional science resume. I don't want them to make up a resume that looks like a business resume. There's certain things that I focus on doing, but I'll tell them you have to sort through the different things you've done in your life and what are the things that the person who is looking over your work in terms of deciding whether they want to interview you or talk further with you, what would they be interested in learning about you? For myself, I've done all sorts of different jobs in my life. I always tell people that I don't think that I put down that I worked at McDonald's anymore. I don't think anyone would be interested in that. My parents had a cleaning company. I did that all the way through college. I just don't, I'm not going to put that down anymore. I have some students that say, well, it shows I work hard or I have management experience. I'm like, well, it depends on what position you're applying for in terms of picking and choosing what you're going to include. And that's why your resume is dynamic. It always changes. You're going to custom tailor that resume to the different position and that in the place that you are applying to. And so that I think that's the best way to approach it.
Okay, I agree. And something you touched on there, I heard from another coach recently. I can't remember if it was the same industry or not, but or a resume writer, and they had recommended or were saying that the new norm is to have something on the bottom of your resume that's like, interests. Well, I cringe at that. Having been on the side of the table where we're looking at reviews, I don't care if you like horseback riding. Maybe I do care, but as far as like me hiring for the job, I don't care. And so this person was saying that, oh, that's the new thing, so that you have something, it's a talking point.
Yeah.
There's no room on your thing for the talking points. So, but if you have a publication as your interest or talking point, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, exactly. There is a bunch of really junk on the internet on how to write a resume from a lot of people that don't know what the hell they're doing. And I'm trying to tell people, look, work with people like Laura, work with people that are in the field, work with people that have been doing it for a while, work with people that review resumes. What would they like to see? And that's how you develop your resume. Go to different companies. Some companies will have the resumes of their employees and see some of the different things that they put on it. But yeah, there's a lot of, I have a whole collection of some really crazy resumes that I show. A lot of them are from the field of marketing that are really crazy, and maybe they might be good for marketing, but I've even seen stuff there. And then they have these resume generators or CV generators, the curriculum vitae, if you were into teaching, and they're awful. You're better off just doing it yourself and looking at different type of examples and seeing how you want to create it. And and focusing really on the what you've done, not where you've done it, but focus on your actual position and be descriptive. Don't just say you were a volunteer, I don't know, whatever, Benson State Park in Mission, Texas. Put down what type of volunteer you did. Maybe you were a I don't know, if you're applying for an environmental position and it was related to environment, put down environmental volunteer, something that will capture people's interest a lot more. Sometimes you need to be very specific like that because the people that might be reviewing your resume in the beginning of the process may have no idea what you do. They might just be an HR person that's going through a checklist, and they're looking for those keywords that fit the job. So that's why I always tell everyone, your resume is going to be very, very type of selective of what you put it in. And then, once you get to meet the person, that might be a good time to bring up the horseback riding if the opportunity arises. I'll give you a great example. One of the reasons why I sent a student of mine to work at the Army Corps of Engineers down the street from the university I worked at in Connecticut. And one of the things I said was because he actually had a horse farm. And one of the things the Army Corps did was maintain horse trails on their land. And so definitely you would want to mention something that,
Right.
I mean, yeah, that's a good example of when you want to put that on there. So you basically kind of pick and choose based on the position and based on the situation, based on the culture of the group of people that you're going to be, you're trying to fit in with, all these different type of things. And, you just kind of see what works and what doesn't. But again, you can always ask other people that are in the field to get hints and, hints about doing that.
Right. And you mentioned the volunteer work, the intern work, that you can always write about it too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And then, it may be appropriate to, depending again, like you just said about what the job is, but maybe it's something you can mention in the cover letter, not on the resume itself.
Oh, yeah.
Read more about it here. All right, I think we have time for one more question. Let me check the board here. I don't see anyone's typed any in. So do I need to copyright my work?
Actually, well, here's the thing. You don't need to officially copyright anything. If you put down your name and you put down a date, then your work has actually been self-copyrighted. There's ways of doing it officially too, but that's probably like the easiest thing to do. If you're working with a publisher, then you are maintaining a certain amount of rights, but that work is being copyrighted for you. And most of the rights are going to the publisher because they're the ones that are taking the risk and they're the ones that are paying for your publication. But you are allowed to use the information that you're presenting in other ways and even in future publications. So basically, you don't have to worry about anything about copywriting. What you more have to worry about is if you use other copyrighted works, is to make sure you either get the permission or, in terms of doing the publication, you've actually cited the person and you've cited it correctly, the source where you got that information from. But in terms of worrying about copywriting your own stuff, you don't have to worry about that.
Okay, good to know. So we're out of time, just perfectly wrapping up here. Thank you, Frank, so much for being on here and sharing all this great information. Everybody, make sure you grab the handout. And if you still had any other questions, and even if you don't have questions, I always encourage everyone to connect with me on LinkedIn. And
yeah, or like I said, or just send me an email or call me, whatever you want to do. I'm glad to.
Yes, let me. My slide's been up here for a while. I'm going to end on your slide, Frank, so they can see yours if they have environmental practice. Oh, is yours not on here? If you don't have it, email me for it.
I'm sorry, I thought I put that in there.
We'll get you in touch one way or the other. So thanks again, guys, and thanks, Frank. And we'll see you in a month. We're going to talk about once you've got the job, how do you keep the job? Because you're usually on probation. So hope to see you then.
All right. Good luck, everyone.
All right. Good night, Frank. Thanks.
Yep. Bye.